And welcome back, continuing our conversation and should I say more to the point analysis with Gogo Aubrey Matshiqi as we look at the State of the Nation address and of course yesterday's debate on that State of the Nation address. And we were talking about at least trying to get to the contents of the State of the Nation address, which Parliament and parliamentarians didn't seem to get to in any meaningful way. But speaking to the issue of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, one of the questions there is the timing for, as you say, you've been talking about this for a decade. Others have mentioned it as well, including the ANC have discussed this at some point. Why then is this an issue right now? Why do you think it emerges almost out of left field at this point?
Well, Sakina, in case I'm misunderstood, I want President Cyril Ramaphosa to succeed because it is in my interest and yours. I want the ANC government to succeed because it is in my interest and yours. But I am beginning to give up on the hope that the ANC is the instrument through which we can change the lives of our people. And I suspect that unconsciously, the president and many in the ANC have come to the same conclusion, that all they can do is to play with different colored crayons, color inside the picture, but will never be able to change the outlines of the picture. And therefore, when the president comes with such an announcement, and you look at the content of the announcement and the content of the measure, and you can't make sense of it, you can make neither political nor economic sense of it. It is because the president has another predilection. There are times when he will say anything to win applause. We saw that with xenophobic violence, for instance. He speaks at the funeral of the late President Robert Mugabe. He stands up, he is booed. And what does he do? He apologizes. Why? To win applause. The next day he comes back to the country. He addresses an ANC meeting in Joburg. What does he say? Foreigners must obey the laws of this country. Why does he say that? A day after what he said in Harare, again to win applause. Now, of course, the alternative is to run the country effectively and deliver. But I suspect that unconsciously the ANC itself is coming to the conclusion that it is not the instrument through which change will occur in this country. But more importantly, you have two parties in this country that represent the elites or elite interests that represent the establishment. It is the ANC and the DA. And the tragedy is that there is a relationship between the ANC and the DA that too many of us do not see. And the relationship lies in how the DA is changing now. The DA has come, I think, to the conclusion, either by accident or otherwise, that it does not need to be a ruling party to advance the interests of its core constituency, because those can be advanced in a Gramscian hegemonic way through the ruling party. In other words, why become a ruling party? Why pretend you are interested in the needs and interests of black people when you have a party that purports to represent the interests of those who were oppressed? That will do that. That will advance your own interests on your behalf. And this is happening precisely because both the DA and the ANC are parties of the establishment, are parties at the moment that exist to promote elite interests.
And then speaking to the issue of energy, and again, what seems to be lacking is a discussion about a just energy transition, as Ongama Mtinga puts it. Because when we look at what the State of the Nation outlines, as you pointed out, where municipalities will now be given the right to actually purchase energy from whichever sources they can find to procure from, and not necessarily from Eskom. But before that, during the mining indaba, Minister Gwede Mantashe also makes the announcement that mining companies themselves would be able to come up with ways of generating their own energy. And speaking to this triple threat of inequality, poverty, and unemployment, how do these sort of measures advance our ability to curb that triple threat?
The irony is this, Sakina. Minister Mantashe speaking to members of the ANC in Joburg before the Nasrec conference argued correctly that, amongst other things, if you want to characterize the battle in the ANC, it is a battle between populists and conservatives. And the conservatives are obsessed with the retention of the status quo, to the extent that the status quo benefits global and domestic capital and a particular section of the South African population. And so when you hear the president making announcements about some of these economic measures, you then realize that the ANC under Ramaphosa has a particular mindset. Its mindset is pro-capital. And in fact, we must ask, who is in charge of the ANC? Is it capital or is it ANC members? Because prior to Polokwane, they argued that the ANC, Maibuyele Emasebeni, must go back to the branches. In other words, ordinary members of the ANC must take ownership of the ANC. That's not where the ANC is today. What has taken ownership of the ANC are elite interests. And that is why sometimes I argue that when a black person votes for the ANC, that person is voting either for his or her economic disenfranchisement or general disenfranchisement, or both.
Another thing that struck me, and I'd love your view on this, when the EFF, during one of their press briefings, we spoke a lot about Pravin Gordhan and people coming to his defense, rightly, wrongly, it doesn't really matter. But that issue seems to have taken prominence over some other things that they mention during given press briefing, where they name people. And they name people like Stephen Kosef, they name companies like Bidvest, like Investec. And they say that these are the people who essentially are steering the president. Now, it brings to mind the question about state capture, given the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. And what is state capture? How would you characterize what was happening during the Zuma years to what is happening right now?
Well, I don't start with the Zuma years, because to argue that the Zuma years were 9 years, 9 wasted years, is a mischaracterization. These were not 9 wasted years of Zuma's presidency. These were 9 wasted years of the president of the ANC. And therefore, these were 9 wasted years of ANC misrule. For me, that is the correct characterization of the Zuma presidency. But I start before that. There is never a time when the state is not captured. Even when, between the antagonists and protagonists in the battle for state capture, even when there is a stalemate, the battle continues, because eventually there must be a victor. So the state had already been captured by particular interests before the Zuma years. Now, South Africans are not in principle opposed to state capture. What they are opposed to is the state being captured by those who are not like them. But when it is captured by those who are like them or who like them, they have no in-principle opposition to state capture. So Zuma comes with his own variation of state capture. But what has happened since Zuma left? And again, this is about the ANC and the DA. These two parties who represent establishment and elite interests are perpetrating another phase of state capture. Because the establishment is reasserting its influence and reasserting its control over the state. And it is doing so through the DA and the ANC, which means South Africa has entered another phase of state capture, which will please us, because the state now is being captured by those who are like us.
Well, so much more to talk about. Unfortunately, no time in which to do so. So we're going to have to leave it there. But thank you so much, political analyst Gogo Aubrey Matshiqi, discussing the recent political developments in the country. Let's take a break.
Thomas.